Welcome to episode number 26 of the Animals at Home podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. Before we jump into today's episode, I did want to mention really quick, some of you may have already heard me say this on Instagram. If you follow me there, I had a story posted last week where I discussed this. And if you are a subscriber on YouTube, you'll have started noticing this. I have started pulling out short clips of podcast episodes and making them their own separate videos. So I've only done 2 up until this point, but it's something that I want to continue doing. So the reason being is that I love posting my podcast on YouTube because it allows you guys to interact with the episode. You can make comments and whatnot and have a conversation underneath the episode. There's no other way to do that. You can't comment on iTunes or anything along those lines, but that's why YouTube is great. But people typically don't sit down and watch a 60-minute YouTube video, although we do end up spending that much time on YouTube inadvertently. But it is one of those things where people see a 60-minute video, they're not necessarily going to be interested in clicking on it. So I want to pull out just sort of short highlights from each episode and have them their own separate clips. So if you are someone who listens to the podcast all the time, just ignore those clips. If you see any podcast clips, I mean, you're welcome to listen to them, of course, but they are going to be repetitive content. Those are more designed to introduce more people to the show. People might see a shorter clip, then they'll be interested or more likely to invest the 2 or 3 minutes to listen to the clip, and then it'll introduce them to the episode, and then maybe they'll go on and listen to it. So that's what I'm doing there. Again, if you've listened to everything, just absolutely ignore those. I really don't want you guys to feel like you're getting spammed. If you are a regular listener of the show, thank you so much. I do really appreciate it. I appreciate all the feedback you guys have given me, positive and negative. I appreciate it all. If you haven't hit the 5-star rating on iTunes yet, please do that. If you want to leave a written word rating, that's fantastic as well. But even just the star rating is really easy. So if you're listening to it on iTunes right now, you can just go ahead and quickly do that. Even before you listen to the episode, that would be fantastic. And as always, if you do want to support the show, animalsathome.ca/shop, you can pick up an Animals at Home t-shirt there, and $5 does automatically get donated to the Amazon Rainforest Conservancy. This week's episode features my conversation with Forrest Fanning. I'm really looking forward to sharing this with you guys because we had a fantastic conversation. Forrest is the owner of Reptek, which is a reptile breeding company in the United States, and he also is the owner of Cold-Blooded Cafe, which is a large, seemingly huge rodent breeding operation in the United States as well. If you ever follow him on Instagram at Zoo Dreams, he once in a while shows his giant rodent breeding operation, and it is really amazing how much business they're doing. Really fascinating stuff to see. But in this episode, we really focused on the philosophy and ethics behind keeping animals. And, I specifically named this episode Leveling Up the Reptile Hobby because it does really feel like we're at that stage now. We're ready to move up to the next stage. We have to absolutely give credit to everybody who's come before us in the last 20 years, establishing a fantastic hobby, giving us this opportunity. The technology has absolutely exploded in the last, 5-10 years. But now it is time for us to take the next step and start advancing the hobby to something more than it is. And that's really what we focused on. And Forrest gave us so many great ideas on how each person can make the hobby better. It doesn't just have to be the big names in the hobby. Every person that owns even a single animal can make the hobby better, and we talk about a bunch of different ways that's possible. And we also discuss the importance of maintaining and keeping the hobby healthy and functioning, because this is a perfect example of how important the reptile industry can be for an individual. It is so easy to see how much passion and purpose Forrest derives from the reptile industry and from the hobby. He's become essentially biologist level intelligence to the specific species he works with, and much more, I'm sure. When you're listening to him talk, this is somebody who really, really understands what he's talking about. And he's also become a very successful entrepreneur, which is amazing. That's all associated with the reptile industry. So this show, the Animals at Home podcast, is as much about reptiles and keeping captive animals as it is about the people who keep the animals. I am really fascinated with what drives people to do that, and I'm always amazed at how much positivity can be added into somebody's life when they're given the opportunity, like being able to keep an animal at home, and it is really amazing. So again, I hope you get a lot from this conversation. I know I certainly did. I'm looking forward to keeping in touch with Forrest and maybe potentially doing another one in the future. So without anything further, here's my conversation with Forrest. All right, Forrest, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me. Big fan of what you're doing, so it's great to be here.
Well, I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and anytime I've heard you speak, it really seems like you have a interesting evolution in the hobby, and B, you've had sort of that evolution has left you with a pretty unique perspective, and it's a perspective that I definitely share. And for myself, I almost seem like an imposter in the hobby sometimes because I don't have a huge collection. I've literally never bred an animal in my life. So I don't have these sort of credentials behind my name, but partly that's allowed me to look at the hobby from an outsider perspective almost, because I'm not quite in it as much as someone like yourself is. And then two, the reason I didn't progress my hobby beyond where it is right now is because I ran into this sort of moral dilemma when I initially wanted to start breeding my boas. And I hit this moment where I thought, I really wanted to do it. It sounded fun. I wanted to sort of evolve my hobby, but then I couldn't bring myself to do it because it just didn't make sense. And it kind of got back to that. Why would I do this? Why would I add more animals to the market? Why would I, is this just for me, or is this going to benefit the animals? So I think there's a great conversation to be had here. And sort of to understand your mindset, can you let everybody know what got you into the hobby? Like how did your journey in this hobby start?
I think like most of us, just being a kid, being outside, I grew up in the Black Hills of South Dakota, and there's some great native herpetofauna there, as well as one of the best reptile zoos in the world, Reptile Gardens. So I remember growing up and being out on my dirt bike and riding around the Black Hills, and every time I'd see a pond with Chrysemys pictobelli, the western painted turtle, that just fascinated me beyond belief. And they're such incredible animals, what they're able to do to get through the intense winters and just the beautiful habitat that they're in. So, that led into eventually, getting my first animals in captivity. I had some pythons and stuff in my teenage years. And then, as I really had aspirations to be a filmmaker and make nature films, like kind of the like PBS Nature was really something that inspired me, and the amazing work that they did making nature films. So later down the road, got into sales and business and stuff. And at that time, being around 18, 19 years old, the ball python hobby was really starting to take full swing, and people were starting to, make a living breeding reptiles in spare bedrooms and garages and stuff like that. So I kind of see, Ralph Davis at that time was a big inspiration to me. That green tree pythons, and then also the rodent business, I started developing the ideas for what I wanted to do around that age. And from 19 to 25 was all chasing down that dream of hopefully becoming a full-time breeder and doing this for a living. And so by 25, I achieved that goal, and now I'm 34 years old. So I've been full-time in this industry for 9 years now without a job and supporting my family and stuff. So it's been a crazy journey.
Right. Yeah. That's kind of what I was wondering is I assume now this was a full-time operation for you, but I wasn't sure how long it took you to evolve. So what were you doing as a 9 to 5 sort of in those early years?
I was doing all sales. So, I lucked out because I didn't have an education. I was basically a dropout, but kind of had the gift of gab and was very driven. I was very driven, and I loved business. I worked with my dad's small business, which was a security company. And so once I got into the field of sales, I, basically did really well, good enough to slowly, put away my money and make happen what I wanted to put together as far as, the operation that we have now. So
in terms of that, as it started, was it both reptile breeding as well as rodent breeding operation?
It was, but definitely the money from the reptiles was a lot more sporadic, and I knew that going into it. I was looking up to guys that were big in the rodent business, and I knew that although that work is honestly just some of the worst work you can do. A lot of times, it's very it's not everybody's dream job, but I knew that the need was there, and that if I could focus enough time and money to, try to fill that niche. And I think it was just kind of the right place at the right time. I think if I was where I was then and I wanted to do the same thing, I don't think that opportunity would be there for me if I tried to do it now. So I just kind of lucked out, I think.
Well, the rodent breeding operation is super interesting in the hobby because it almost is analogous to like the pickaxe and shovel salesperson in the gold rush, like you're really getting it's something that everybody needs no matter what. You got lots of people breeding that maybe aren't making money, but everybody needs rats.
Yep. Yeah. It's been a crazy couple of years, and a lot of different things have affected the rodent market. And so it's an up and down, and you have to be, put to do any of this, whether it's the reptile breeding or the rodent breeding, to do any of it on the commercial scale, the level of infrastructure you need to, it takes you a long time to get all your caging and your buildings. And it also takes just so much experience. I mean, no matter what, with animals, there's no way to value that measure of experience. And you usually learn from making mistakes. And it's there's so many moving parts to it. And that's why, for me, I love the business side of what we do, and I love all the people involved and stuff. But to hear your story, I love that. I love that you're coming into this and you're saying, okay, well, why do I want to do this? What do I want to achieve with this? What does it mean to me? What does it mean for the animals? That conversation is really dear to my heart, and love.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like, I mean, I've heard you say similar things as well. And is that where you kind of started with that mindset, or how did you get to that sort of, liking that conversation?
Not at all. I started totally the opposite. I was like, I could be breeding these snakes and selling them for huge money, which I definitely did do some of that. And it was great to succeed at a goal and stuff. But no, I think over time, and this is where I'm having to be careful now with this conversation, is over time, as you have you go through it all, you kind of get a little jaded, or you kind of see some of the bad sides of the hobby, and maybe, more shady people where they don't care about the animals and it's all about the money and all that stuff. So I think over time, and that's when I say I have to be careful, because I've found myself now almost having kind of this like elitist mentality, or, judging other people who are doing things that I used to do and most of my friends do and stuff. So I think there's room for all of us, and any of us that love reptiles. We shouldn't do that. We shouldn't look down on each other. And the reality is that these people breeding pythons and boas and all these other animals, they're taking the pressure off of wild populations. I mean, the amount of reptiles that are being captive bred in the United States, it's absolutely incredible. And if we can continue that trend towards sustainable breeding and ethical breeding of animals to stop the other side. So, me and Brian were kind of talking publicly about, how much he gets attacked for racks, and we were talking about doing stuff. And that was probably the first time I've ever had a lot of people reach out to me, kind of angry with me for.
Oh, really?
Yeah. For kind of, saying, basically for being kind of judgmental. They felt like I was being judgmental towards them or not supportive towards them. And so that kind of made me have to look at the things that I was saying, and just that the ethics of it, of where I am, of what my business is, of what got me where I am. And so, but it evolved to me over time, where it's just like, for me personally, I wanted, I don't like selling animals, and I don't like the disposable animal mentality. Like, I don't like that I'm going to have this now, and then it's only going to be there for so long. Like, I like looking at my collection, like, hey, these animals have a life plan. They're going to be here forever, and they each mean something to me. And I don't want to just have this tree monitor here and get it all set up in a perfect scenario where it's totally happy, started right, captive born, everything's good, and then, totally screw its life up and send it somewhere else and have it end up in some tank in a pet shop. Like, I don't want to do that. So, so I just, for me, I guess over time, I just started to think about it, for okay, why am I doing this, and what is the purpose? And so for my collection, that my goal for my collection, over the long run, is to be a place where people can come and see this stuff, where they can learn, or hopefully I can have students come in and herpetologists and make it just a great place for learning, and hopefully eventually a place where the stuff can be displayed. So that's my long run.
Yeah. And, I totally agree with you that it's a conversation that we have to be careful with, because, it's something that I had mentioned a few weeks ago, that we are all actually more alike than we are different. We're all here for the same reason, and we can somewhat take different paths. And I totally know what you mean with that elitist attitude. You kind of get into like, oh, I don't breed morphs and this sort of thing. And
Yep.
I watch myself do that as well, and just be careful, because I know for a fact that if I got into breeding ball python morphs, I would be absolutely obsessed with it, like,
Yes.
because I know that's my personality, and that's why I had to catch myself before I got there. But had I taken the next step, this would be like, piebald central or something behind me, and so we do have to kind of be careful in that sense. Initially, what were you breeding? What got you into the breeding hobby? Was it ball pythons mostly, or?
Ball pythons and green tree pythons.
Okay.
And I loved the ball pythons, but I think it was more, that part was more of the business, what I call being a calculator cowboy, where you're sitting there saying, if I breed this to this, I'm going to make this much. And you're sitting there, and trust me, it never works out how it does. Every now and then you get lucky, but it's usually about a tenth of what you think you're going to do. But the green trees were totally different. It was just like this awe and just fascination with the animals and where they come from, and learning about the different localities and all that. And for me, as somebody who is not traditionally educated, looking back, it's one of the things that I think is so beautiful and amazing about what we do, is that now I didn't have a good background in biology or any of these things. I knew almost nothing. And now, having spent, over half my life focusing on this stuff, it's taught me all these things. Now I consider myself a naturalist. Now I feel like I have a decent background in science and how things work. So the fact that that's why I'm not going to look down on other aspects of the hobby, because I started out as a morph guy, and here I am now. And I feel so blessed that I'm getting to interact with the top herpetologists in the world and zoologists and all this stuff. And I'm getting to, work with really cool species and stuff. So it's a great starting point, and I'm super thankful for that it led me to conservation, because otherwise I wouldn't know anything about this stuff. So.
Yeah, and that's the really interesting thing about the hobby, and that's one of the things that I try to nail down is, there is a value to the hobby. And for yourself, like, how different would your life have been if you didn't graduate high school? How different would your life have been had reptiles not been part of it?
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't have had the sense of purpose, and I wouldn't have chased down this incredible dream. And now I feel like I knew growing up that there was gonna be something big that I would be a part of, and I was searching for that purpose. And now there's no question about what that purpose is, and it's about promoting conservation, about promoting how amazing these animals are, and just doing from this point out, it's like everything I do, I just want it to be about positivity, bringing people together, and making this community the most that we can to help ourselves understand them and help the animals themselves, as much as we can.
So then, after kind of going from the green tree pythons, then obviously you started tilting towards more rare and, I guess, more expensive animals. What are some of the things that you just started adding to the collection?
Well, from part of what made the green tree python community so amazing was, it was basically when I got into it, the top guys that were really leading that community were literally some of the top animal people in the entire world. I mean, Terry Phillip from Reptile Gardens, second largest reptile collection in the world, my hometown. Trooper Walsh, at the National Zoo, he was the curator. Probably the most notable zoologist of our time, currently living today. He was the first guy to, really one of the first guys, him and Eugene Bissett, to start breeding chondros. Rico Walder, who was a former zoo curator, probably the most prolific arboreal snake breeder that ever lived. There was a guy, John Holland, his wife, Jenny Holland, was chief editor for National Geographic, went on to write New York Times bestseller. So, basically going to Tinley Park, and that would be the group of people sitting around. And I was one of the newer people getting to meet these people and feed off them and develop the ethics that I wanted to go forward with. Marshall Mendez, another guy that breeds green trees and emeralds, is just, these guys really, really instilled that and being zoologists and stuff, you start, I started really wanting to know about crocodiles. So I started volunteering and working with crocodilians, and, just little by little, it wasn't up until a few years ago that I really started to fall in love with lizards. And once I got into lizards and monitors, that kind of just overtook everything else. And at this point, I'm really focused on the varanids, the monitors, and the abronia lizards are another thing that I'm really passionate about. So
Yeah, I mean, your collection is insanely beautiful. Like you have, and I think that's why people love it so much, because you have so many different animals that you don't see all the time, and it's really amazing to see. Is the building that we see on your Instagram, is that part of your home? Like, is that on the same property or no?
It's on this. Well, right now we're remodeling the home portion, so I'm living off site right now, but yeah, it's all on a 5-acre property. There's a rodent farm, and then but it's separated buildings and stuff. The reptile building has one main room, and then there's a separate room that's like the cloud forest room that stays much cooler. And but we're in the process of building. It seems like always we're in the process of adding on and building on, and trying to figure out that perfect setup for the species that we're working with.
So then eventually, like, your home will be I guess your home is on that 5-acre land. It's just being renovated, so you'll get to live there.
Yep. Yeah, I did live there for a while, and then we decided to have a child. And as that became a reality, she's like, we can't. This place is it's not where it needs to be to have a child yet. So we had to find something temporary as we get things ready to make everything baby friendly there.
Was your wife involved in the hobby before she met you, or did she become part of the hobby with you?
Yeah, she was not particularly interested in them. She just was along for the ride, and basically fell in love with them with me. And she's she might not nerd out as much over the details and stuff like I do over each species, but she's got a tremendous amount of knowledge of the husbandry, and she went to school for nursing, so she just has that kind of nursing. So she has like that nurturing type of effect on things. And so she's very good with the veterinary stuff that we have to do at home, all overseen, of course, by our ARAV veterinarians, but she's just really good at monitoring health and weight and handling animals and stuff. So she's fell just in love with it as I have. And so
that's awesome. That must be a huge help. It would be horrible if she hated them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a plus. I mean, there's downsides to it as well. I mean, she hasn't worked since we went full time with this either, and she really wanted to pursue a nursing career, but things had just kind of happened so fast, and she's so valuable that I couldn't really do it without her. And I think you see that a lot in the reptile community. You see it with Brian and Lori, or Mark and Kim, Bill and Marsha Brandt, Eugene and Cindy Bissett. A lot of the, it's like that most of the time, where, you got the guy building the dream and doing all this crazy stuff, and then a really strong woman supporting him and kind of holding it all together. And so that's...
Yeah, I mean, the reptile business is not an easy one to be involved in. I think that's one of the almost the shames about the sort of image that sometimes people think, is that it's just, you buy 5 ball pythons and you're going to be rich in 6 months. And it is unfortunate.
No, I mean, it's nearly impossible to succeed at a reptile business. I mean, it's extremely difficult. It's not difficult to do it, to have it as a side thing where you're not putting all your eggs in that basket, but you've got stuff that you're keeping and you're passionate about and you're breeding. And if you go into it with realistic expectations, and you go into it with the mindset that no matter what, I'm doing this just to do it. I love these animals, but I would like to, propagate healthy offspring and be able to share them with other people like myself. And if you realize that you have to, just because you get a pair of animals and you breed them, they produce babies, they're not going to sell themselves. So you've got to be able to you've got to take on that role of marketing, and that's a whole nother thing. So it's very complicated. There's a lot of things that come with it that you have to learn. And so, somebody like yourself, where you say you haven't been doing this for very long, you're taking a very well thought out approach to it. And if we can educate more people to do that, and if we as a community can get them to think a little more and give them more resources to do it right from the start, and that's where, things like this right here, these two books from John Smith, these are the kind of things, and I mean, I listen to his podcast on the Chameleon Breeder podcast over and over. I'll be watching this one over and over he did with him. And these books, I mean, these are the kind of books where it's like, the fact that we have access to a mind like his now and this kind of information, it's so exciting. And that's the positive part about our community going forward, is we just have more and more resources to care for these animals in a much better way than we did even 10 years ago. So that's exciting.
Well, yeah, and John was amazing because, I mean, we're talking about that elitism feeling. He has absolutely nothing in terms of that feeling. Like when I was speaking to him, I really wasn't sure what to expect, if he was going to come out like, there's only one way to care for animals. You have to be bioactive and whatnot, but absolutely not. He's so passionate about the pet hobby and just making sure that there's enough support to get people to where they want to go, and making sure we limit the amount of, wrong turns somebody can take along the way.
Yep. Absolutely. That's what it's all about, is education. And, another person I would really like to see you reach out to is Ryan McVeigh from Madison Area Herp Society in Zilla. This guy he's absolutely the biggest wealth of information I think I have in my life. I mean, it seems like whatever event I go to, even if it's like the Reptile Law Symposium in Washington, D.C., Ryan's going to be there. The Herpathon meetings that we just had, Ryan's there. And he's been one of the, him and Erica have really built the model reptile rescue, the most successful reptile rescue. I think Erica's really the one that did all that, and he's supported her. And then they've built the most functioning, successful herp society as well. So those are all things we were talking about at this Herpathon meeting in San Diego. Was basically a meeting of the minds, everything from zoologists, herpetologists, big breeders, private keepers, all coming together saying, what can we do to fix these issues we're having, and how do we move forward in the best direction possible? So it was pretty special.
I mean, that sounds amazing. Yeah, because you're totally right. We're kind of left with like, what are we doing? Why are we all doing this? And the sort of the warning sign for me is we need to make sure it's the hobby that adjusts the direction that we're going. Because if we don't do that, government legislation will do it. And that's the worst thing that will happen to us, because then we will literally be left with nothing. And like a situation like yourself, if you couldn't own exotic reptiles, like we already said, who knows what you'd be up to? You wouldn't be basically a biologist at this point. No. Who knows, right?
Yeah. No, we've got to do everything we can. And that all starts with stopping this outrage culture BS and ripping people apart, pointing out these little things that we feel like others are doing wrong. And it's all about leading by example. And, I feel like a lot of people are having the same feeling and the same thoughts right now. So we're all just trying to come together and figure out, okay, what do we have to do to make sure that we don't lose this ability? Because it's the most important thing that what usually is that genesis of somebody's life where they realize how much they love animals is usually when they get to interact with one, when they get to hold one in their hands, or they get to see one in the wild, or they, go to a zoo, see a television program. So if we remove that ability, there was a statistic brought up at the conference where we were talking about the amount of reptiles killed on the road, which is obviously, that's the biggest. That and deforestation are so, I mean, 1% wild collection for the pet trade, and everything else is these other issues. And, they did a study, actually a third of people admitted in a college, big college talk they were doing, a third of people rose their hands saying they actually swerved to run over a turtle on the road at some point in their life. So,
oh my God.
Yeah. So, think of all the people who didn't raise their hand, and, to people like us who would risk our lives moving the turtle out of the road in the proper way. It's terrible to think of that. And obviously we know that's the percentage of people in the world who don't give a damn about the future of what's left in the wild, or else they wouldn't be just, raping and pillaging what we have out in nature. So, so having our ability to, try to convert those people over to caring about animals, that's really important. And so social media is a great thing we have on, that's a tool we never had before. Usually only big companies decided what was spread to the masses as far as information. Now we have this very scary but very powerful tool. I mean, you look at, the most viral videos you see on the internet most of the time, people love these videos where, say, there's a beached whale and people push it back into the water, or somebody saves this, those kind of videos. People just really, really seem to get something emotionally out of that, or seeing somebody build a relationship with an animal they didn't think a human could, like the octopus video of the woman coming back to the octopus every day. And, so that desire is there, and it's within people. It's how we present it to them. And if we can do that more effectively, I'd say the biggest problem right now is just this negativity that we see, people putting all this focus into ripping these people down who are getting most of the attention, whether it's a pet tuber or a famous reptile person. They want to rip those people down. And instead, what we need to do is be going to those people and saying, hey, let's spread this message. Let's get more people involved in conservation. And those people would be open to it if they weren't, being so ripped apart. So I really hope we can find a way through social media to further that in love.
Well, yeah, you're making, that's a really, really good point. And social media and online communication has definitely hit the ditch in a way. Like there are certain things about human nature that are being exploited on sort of in the online discourse, because I think, obviously we know people say things online that they would never say in person. So trying to shift the Facebook conversation and the YouTube conversations to more positive, because you're right, it's really wild what people will say through their keyboard.
Yeah, it is. And, it's just ridiculous, and you can sit there and you can get really jaded about it and you can get frustrated by it, or you can say, hey, I'm not going to get caught up all in that. I'm going to just be positive about, even if I think pet tubers are for the most part ridiculous, wow, they're reaching tens of millions of people showing them their pets, and so, wow, that's awesome that many people are willing to watch that. So we've got to just focus on those positive aspects and
exactly. And I've been thinking about this for a while, so we'll see what you think about this. Like I was saying, there are these human nature sort of behaviors that are in us that you aren't necessarily aware of as the individual. Like we act out these things without being aware of it. It's just like biological, driving us to behave in a certain way. And I think two of the major issues in the hobby with these type of behaviors are, one, and this is something I really nailed down talking to John, and he helped me understand this more clearly, is we are by nature collectors. We love to collect things. We love to have more of things, different things that look different, rare things. And that has led to collections that expand beyond what a person is capable of caring for.
Absolutely.
And then the second one that I found is we have that gambling mentality where we want something for nothing. And that's really pumped the morph market, obviously. So it's like almost like we need to step back and say, wait, these are two behaviors that are not, that's not me driving it. That's some biological factor. Like that's why I have, 10,000 ball pythons. It's not because I want them. It's because there are other things happening in me that I'm not aware of.
Yep. Yeah. We want newer keepers to be aware of that. And I think, what can we take care of? That's a really, really important question. And it's something, that a lot of us learn through experience, what's that critical mass that we're going to hit. And I've heard, breeders say, a snake breeder once told me, he goes, I've found that anything more than 100 breeders is I can't care for that myself. They don't breed well for me. I can't care for the hatchlings. I have health issues. But if I stay at that number, and we're talking about somebody that was breeding colubrids in a rack in a bedroom. But if you're somebody that you want to have a multi-species collection, that number is it's going to be less than that. And there's all of these different factors that go into that. Number one, the health issues of it, the veterinary issues of it. So we're in a very fortunate point in time right now where we have this association of reptile and amphibian veterinarians. And so now we're at a point where veterinarians who treat reptiles are going to these conferences and they're sharing their cases. They're going over what issues are happening with these animals, whether it be cryptosporidium, nidovirus, paramyxo, zoonotic diseases between people and animals. And they're sharing this information at a level that we couldn't have dreamed of a decade ago. So the first thing is that you understand, so if I'm going to build this collection, what are the things that could go wrong? What are the dangers of having a wild caught animal? What are the dangers of not quarantining animals properly? And then what are my abilities with the collection I want to build? Do I have room to quarantine an animal? And am I going to have the discipline enough to wait that, these are really difficult things to do. What we're trying to do in captivity is beyond it. To really do it right, it's almost, it's far outside the reach of a normal person to build a multi-species collection and not have disasters happen and not bring in bad pathogens and stuff like that. It's difficult because we are still in our infancy of being able to test, diagnose, and understand these problems that are there. But it's happening. It's happening right now. And in 10 years, I think we're going to be so much further than we can even imagine with being able to obtain healthy stock and maintain healthier collections and work with veterinarians more with more animals, because that's a hard thing to do is once you get so many, you start saying, well, is it worth that trip to the vet for this animal that I only paid this for? That's what we don't want to see so much. So, so we want to really be promoting, people respecting and being more willing to pursue veterinary care for their animals. A lot of times they'll take the advice of a breeder, which I think is really a bad idea. Not that those breeders don't know their animals. They do. And a good veterinarian respects that and will even ask you your opinion first. But what you don't understand is that massive field of veterinary medicine that's as complicated as could be. So, we need to be promoting that, and we need to be promoting that don't take on more than you can. And then we need to provide options for the people who cannot care for an animal any longer, or if they're deceased or these things happen. And that's where, like I said, like with what Madison Herp Society's done very successfully with their rescue and adoption programs, we're all looking at them trying to figure out how do we do something on a national and even worldwide scale to deal with these things. And then, going back to what you were saying about policing ourselves, okay, now it's time to start going after people who are selling sulcatas for $35. There's organizations out there that actually are quite credible that will take in rescue sulcatas, bring them home, breed them by the hundreds, if not thousands, and take them back to reptile shows and sell them. This kind of stuff, and I'm not, like I said, I'm here to be positive only. That's why I'm not going to say that person's name. But hey, let's get to the point where people are educated enough where when they go to a show and they see a sulcata tortoise for sale, they basically it's like that person's being stoned at the show for,
Totally.
Why are you selling those? What are you doing? Why aren't you selling, this species of tortoise that is or something that the person can succeed with and the animal can have a healthy life? Because we can, and that's why we have to be thankful that what the godfathers of this business, like, Bill Brandt and Eugene Bissett and Mark Bell, the animals they chose to breed in big numbers, ball pythons, corn snakes, leopard geckos, these are animals that a child can go and put in their home and they can take care of it properly. And they're numbers that can be sustainably farmed. They brought almost the number of ball pythons that were brought out of Africa this year was minuscule. It was very minuscule, almost no need for it. And so that means, ball pythons didn't go extinct with all of this. they're in a great spot because we made a sustainable thing. People over there were able to maintain their trade and put females back in the wild and only take out captive hatched offspring. And so that's why I've had to, I had to kind of be like, what are you talking about going after these ball python people? Because ball pythons are a really excellent animal for somebody to have in a captive environment in a snake rack. They're one of the only species of snake. Ryan McVeigh shared this with me recently, that they're one of the only species of snake that does not show any benefit from UVB. So they don't need UVB. A lot of the other snakes do and benefit from it. So for those snakes like colubrids and stuff that are showing a benefit, okay, well, is there some kind of way that we can nutritionally supplement those animals that aren't, instead of attacking the person saying for keeping them in racks, all right, well, maybe there's another way we can do that. And so guys like John Courtney Smith are helping us unravel that puzzle of nutrition and stuff so we can better care for those animals.
Yeah, and exactly. Like it's awesome that we're not taking too much out of the wild anymore, and the racks definitely serve that purpose for us because we are able to produce a mass amount of offspring and animals that kids can get. And I think that the focus just needs to shift to, if you're buying one ball python, how can we make it so the interest is in, making a nice enclosure and being able to watch that animal interact with its environment, having a little bit more enrichment, because that, I think, is one of the best parts about the hobby, is watching the animals. Like, I don't handle my animals almost ever really, but I love watching my animals. And I think that would be overall positive rather than, selling an animal as like an investment,
Yeah, I selling them as an investment, that's such a slippery slope. And although it's a lot better now because the ridiculous numbers on the dollar value of the animal, they're more reasonable. There's not so many $50,000 snakes like there were when I was getting into it. And when that happened, it really burnt people out because they'd spend all this money and then they'd have these huge losses. And
it's so sad.
People would be cutting each other's throats and doing whatever it took. Because basically, once you and the guy next to you both have the same animal, the only way you end up being able to sell your animal in the end is like slander and being super aggressive and chasing down buyers. But now it's like the market's more reasonably priced, and it seems, I don't know, it seems to be a little less drama, little less on the line for the people that are enjoying those animals. So that's a positive thing. And I agree with you. I think that naturalistic setups and more of the trends we see in Europe, that's the future, and that's what is going to become much more popular just because it's a lot more fun to see your animals in a naturalistic setup. However, the way those keepers interact with their animals is, when you go through and you're cleaning and you're changing out the bedding and the water every week, for them, that's the time when they get, they're holding that ball python in their hand and they're looking at it and it's crawling around and stuff. But really the environment they're providing in that tub, it's really similar to what they do in the wild. They're ambush predators. And some of them, even like Boland's pythons, for example, they find them down in the, they go to the same spot. They like the familiarity of their own scent. There's a lot of sheds and feces and stuff down where they're at. And so they're not out just freely cruising all over the place waiting for a bird to come pick them off. They're looking for a safe place where they can feel comfortable and have, access to food and water. And so that's why I think we have to, let's be careful with judging those people as, hey, since it's not on display, you're not doing it for the right reasons, or you're a bad keeper. Not all species. There's some species that do very terrible on display. Some, there's a stress factor to us keeping these animals that we have to take into consideration too. There's a lot of research that shows less interaction means healthier animals. If you look at studies done on leopard geckos, for example, changing their enclosure, cleaning it twice a week versus once a week, far less production twice a week, far more or higher mortality rate. So interacting but again, that doesn't really necessarily relate to wanting to have this beautiful enclosure. The other thing you have to take into account for those species that bioactive setups are not as easy to obtain success with, those species, you can be creating a more difficult environment for them for you to care for. So you've got to kind of balance those things out. With dart frogs, bioactive substrates, live vivariums, they're a must, and it's amazing and it's beautiful. For say a species, maybe like a Halmahera scrub python, Morelia, or the Tracii, very rare species, has only been bred once. Blake Bauer just did it at Oklahoma City Zoo. Those animals, you would probably see more problems with them on display than you would in a dark enclosure. Or I was very into these African colubrids, Jackson's tree snakes, Thrassops jacksoni. And, when I would put them on display, because that's what I wanted to do, I wanted to see these fast moving tree snakes move around. They did really terribly. I had to put them in dark tubs with that ability to climb and have lighting and stuff, but they just, and that's the exciting thing though, is when we do come across those species, what's our goal? Our goal is to get F4, F5, that's the number of generations that you've bred from your wild caught adult. And we see huge changes. The reticulated pythons from 10 years ago, 10, 20 years ago, reticulated pythons were awful snakes. You couldn't even handle them safely. Very dangerous. Now, as we have domesticated that species, now they're safe to work with. They're healthier. They're more viable. So, the goal is to have sustainable colonies of all species, hopefully someday, that are in captivity, that are as many generations captive bred as we can get, so that we can maintain them in captivity. And there's multiple reasons why we should have genetic banks of all species in captivity. One of them is, we don't know, there's been several major medical breakthroughs based off reptiles, whether we talk about Gila monsters. Recently, there was something with AIDS and the Philippine crocodile, with a major discovery. So what if we discover the cure for something that's threatening our species is within a species of reptile or amphibian? And what if we find out that we need a sustainable harvest of that species for that discovery to help us through a problem we're having? If that species is extinct and we don't have it in captivity, we can't do that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what the hobby does almost perfectly, is you have people like yourself who are just obsessed with learning about how to do this. And I had this conversation with a biologist a few weeks ago. The universities and the research centers can't necessarily do that because it takes too much time and too much money to be able to learn how to replicate a species or how to get a species to produce. And the hobby does a great job of that, and that's one of the best benefits. And I've heard you talk about the invisible arc before, and that's very much sort of what that's talking about, right? Making sure that we have a sustainable colony in captivity.
Yep, absolutely. I think that there's definitely plenty of reasons for us working towards that goal. And we have huge obstacles to overcome, whether it's the legal challenges of doing this, finding ways where smuggling isn't going to, take these animals out of existence. We've got to combat smuggling. We've got to combat legislation and work with our authorities, whatever country we're in, on understanding this stuff. We've got to educate them before they're educated by extremists who don't want any animals in captivity at all. That's the line in the sand that we're up against. And anything on our side of that extreme end of the fence, because, hey, that fish and game person, they probably have a dog at home. So they're more on our side than that person who has been persuaded by this extreme organization. Doesn't mean we can't convert a lot of those people have swayed over to reality. But we've got to overcome that hurdle. We've got to prove, if you want to work with a rare species or you want to consider yourself part of the invisible arc, you've got to prove to yourself and your colleagues that you're capable of having that responsibility. And that means that you're going to do quarantine. You're going to make sure not to pass pathogens or let animals get loose out into the wild. It means you're going to, that's a very serious thing. And if we want to be respected by the academic or zoological community to have that responsibility as private keepers, we've got a long way to go in repairing the damage that's been done by those who have done bad things in the past. So that's a big part of the goal too, is, in Europe, they, at least up until very recently, they had a very open relationship between private keepers and the zoological field. So that's what we want, is we want to, and now it's, even for zoos and especially academics, if there's one crowd of people that are very, very hurt by legislation and they get completely blown over, nobody thinks about them and what they're going through to get permits to do their work. They spend more time trying to get permits to do their field work than they do doing field work, easily half or more. They spend, the greatest minds in the world who should be out there 100% of the time collecting specimens, understanding data, making discoveries, they are spending half their time dealing with red tape. That's unacceptable. And somebody needs to be a voice for them too, So, but the problem is because they don't get along with our side of the hobby, US Art can't really go fight for them because half of the academics out there don't want anything in captivity because they've been brought up in this misinformation that it's not a good thing for the animals. So
yeah, exactly. You see a lot of academics with that point of view, and whenever I have an academic on the show, I really try to make the point that the reason they got into animals almost always has to do with a pet that they an experience that they had when they were younger, or going to a collection or a zoo where you can see something in captivity. So there is obviously a huge value to it. But one thing that the hobby has to remember is kind of what you're saying is keeping reptiles is 100% a privilege and absolutely not a right. And sometimes we get into that mode where we're like, oh, I can just care whatever I want and have any animals, and that's just not the case.
No, it's not. It is a privilege, and it's something where obviously we could lose that right. And if we don't police ourselves, if we don't promote all these things in a positive way. And hey, one thing that doesn't really work is tearing people down, or you've got to approach them from a position of respect and then try to convert them through, you've got to persuade these old timers who might still be doing things that portray us in a negative light. And so that's the thing, but I don't want us to lose this right. I'm almost as passionate. Originally the dream was to have a zoo and have massive captive breeding. And I see such a void in, helping solve these legal issues and all that stuff, where I'm almost more passionate about helping be a part of that bigger picture in conservation now than I am of just having a facility with animals that I want to work with. So it's, and I hope that people that are watching this and taking in some of this information, I hope we can get a lot more of them on board with wanting to, hey, have your dream instead of being the biggest breeder, have your dream to be the best lawyer that's fighting for herpetoculture, be the best veterinarian like, Scott Stahl, who is just a huge proponent of our hobby. There's so many things you can do within this animal world, and whether you're a ball python breeder or a zoologist or a photographer or a YouTuber, whatever you want to do, just make it your goal to have the best positive impact you can on everybody else, and educate every person you can who doesn't like reptiles about, try to instill the love of nature in them, and then just try to be an example for those around you, and hopefully we'll all go further with that mentality.
Yeah, hopefully we can sway the third of the room who intentionally runs over turtles to lean over this way. And I'm sure you've had the same experience because you have obviously a great collection, and anybody that comes and sees my animals, I mean, most people are afraid of snakes.
Yep.
But it takes like 10 minutes for them to touch it, like 10 minutes of looking at it, then they'll pet it. And I mean, not always they'll hold it because I get it, because they're scared, but it's amazing how quickly someone's mind, like I remember my fiance's mother was basically like, if you ever get a snake, I'm never coming to your house. and like, she was serious. And now she touches them. She takes pictures of them. It's really amazing.
Yep. Yeah. It's so great seeing people overcome those fears and being able to show them how unrealistic those fears are. You're at this average non-venomous snake you're going to come across. I mean, harmless, their bites almost, inflict no pain, but it's this mental fear, just like with arachnids, just take a spider bite sometime and realize how crazy it is to have this horrible fear of insects or arachnids and stuff. And so when we can show them that, and we don't see in the big picture how big of progress we've made, but man, I run into people all the time now in normal parts of life where either they keep a snake or they know a friend that has some ball pythons, or I mean, this hobby is so much bigger I don't like to say hobby, but this, this, what we do, this, whether you say industry or interest, field of interest, because hobby means it's something that comes and goes. Hopefully your love of animals does not come and go. And hopefully if you take the responsibility of pet or animal ownership, hopefully that doesn't come and go. Make it a commitment to that animal for life. So.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've any of my animals that I have, I just can't imagine ever shuffling them around to different owners. Like I had the same crested gecko that got me into the hobby originally. He's sitting right behind me. I've had him for 15 years. I could never get rid of that animal. But what do you think are some ways that we can start shifting the culture away from that, like a tear each other down, to more understanding that we need to sort of take the torch here and be leaders because like we've said, we could get this all taken away from us quickly if we don't act first.
All you can do is completely ignore negativity. Don't try to fix, what's negative or characters out there who are focused on that. Let them do their thing, but go out there, start a YouTube channel, start a herpetology or I like this idea of herpetoculturist societies where almost it's a group of people keeping animals, but go out there and make your mark and just spread positivity. Get everybody you can on board with the most up-to-date information, and that's all every one of us can do is what's the most impact you can have. And if you feel like you're a great content creator, go out and create content. If you feel like you're a great educator, go out and educate. If you feel like you're the best breeder, go out and breed and make sure you're spreading the right information to your customers and the people you bring into this, because the more of us there are, the better off we are. And then obviously support USARK with everything you can. Every penny you can give to USARK helps. I've been giving them, a monthly cash donation that's as much as a car payment for 3 years now. So, that's really important to me because I know USARK is going to do everything they can to fight for our rights. So, and hopefully, like I said, the Herpeton meetings were just absolutely incredible. And everybody was asking that same question: what can we do going forward to have a positive impact? How can we change? And hopefully we're going to see the emergence of some new organization or some new things that can tie all this together. But, it's always the challenge of egos and disagreements and these things we don't agree on. The number one thing you can do is not focus on those, focus on the things we do agree on, build each other up, don't tear each other down. That's what we got.
I think that's essentially the perfect answer. It's really about taking individual responsibility over the hobby. Like the question everybody needs to ask is, why are you in it and what can you do to make it better? And I think that's the best way to go about it, because it's easy to try to solve Brian Barczyk's problems because you just sit on YouTube and you comment and say, this is stupid, he's doing this wrong. But you're sitting at home on your phone typing a comment. That is easy. That's not actually helping anything.
Yep, absolutely. And so thankful for the amount of people Brian is brought into this, and he's such an he's one of my best friends, and it's like he's such an incredible person because, like yourself, he sits there and asks himself, why am I doing this? How can I do this better? And he's a forward-thinking person and just such an awesome person for all of us. But he's been disenfranchised or frustrated with the community because he's had to deal with so much of it, and that's the same thing I try to tell him when I see him, is just forget about that and the potential of you've already blown away what any of us ever could have imagined could have been done on YouTube, how many people could be reached. I mean, when we travel around, it's like normal, you could walk through the airport and 20 people are going to ask him to take a picture with him. That's amazing. What's the potential of going forward, what he can do, how he can spread this love and passion for animals? It could be beyond our wildest dreams. So let's champion people like him that are able to reach people, and let's make sure we can develop the most effective message for those people coming into it. And I think if we do that, we'll be able to win this fight to do what we do, and also win the fight for the animals to continue to exist on this planet. That's the biggest thing. So.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that is exactly right. And I think we're almost at the end of the hour here. So I want to just ask you one really quick question. Those, sort of changing the subject in a way, the enclosures that you have set up with your tree monitors and whatnot, are those all that you've built by hand yourself, or what are those?
No, those were built by Doug Barr, who owns Barr Caging, and then JPM Reptilia distributes his products and artwork, I would say. He builds stuff for zoos all over the country. Those cages, I modeled them directly after Manfred Reisinger's cages in Europe. He bred almost all the tree monitors for the first time. The yellow tree monitor was named in his for after him because he discovered them in a food market. They come from Misol Island, and so I basically just said, hey, this guy's had success continually with several different tree monitors. I need those exact cages built, basically, and so I went to Doug, and Doug had those made for me. So.
Yeah, because those are really cool, and it's nice to see nice, huge enclosures with a ton of enrichment, and obviously the animals look extremely healthy in them.
Yeah. I mean, part of that is I started with all captive-born animals. They were available. I had to hunt kind of, I couldn't just go out and say, I want all 5 species of tree monitors in the U.S. right now. I had to wait until a captive-born animal became available. But if you look at a captive-born one versus a wild-caught one, it's such a huge difference. Like they're super, they're so flighty and difficult to work with and stuff when they're wild-caught, and captive-born ones are really awesome. And they're really, that's a 5 foot tall, 2 foot deep, 4 foot wide cage. It's something that can fit in your living room. I get this question several times a week: what's the right starter monitor for me? It's a tough one because there really isn't a very good starter monitor. Probably a pygmy mulga or one of these dwarf species, but they're expecting, that's a moral dilemma I get a lot, is people see that I've spent all this time with some of these monitors in my collection and they're socialized, but there's no guarantee you're going to get a socialized monitor. You're going to have to be dedicated and start with captive-born animals and learn how to build that trust. So I hate that the fact that people see my tree monitors probably made this many people go out and buy them and maybe not make the right choices with caging and stuff. So I'm going to try to do more to educate people on how to set up these animals that maybe that I'm known for anyways, and try to promote good husbandry, because they're awesome. And it's something I think the average person can do really well with and get a lot out of keeping them. You just gotta make sure you're doing a few things right with your husbandry. So.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because people see, I mean, they look incredible. So you're like, and they're not huge. So
Yep.
yeah, a tree monitor would be fantastic. But like, what really drew you to the monitors? Is it just because they almost have like a personality or like a level of intelligence that's you don't find anywhere else, really?
That's what it was just, when I started interacting with lizards and I, tongue feeding them every day and hydrating them every day, it just became this bond. And when I got my first baby crocodile monitor, captive-born Kilo, from my good friend Joe Satowski, the bond with this animal has just been, I mean, it's like a dog. I love her so much. I want to go in there and talk to her. And when she wants to come out, she comes out, and she's just so intelligent. I just never imagined that I would have that kind of relationship with a reptile. So they're amazing. They're at the peak of difficulty though, and you need a lot of experience to work with a monitor, but you can get that same kind of interaction out of a bearded dragon or a frilled dragon. I really like captive-born frilled dragons. I think those are great lizards for people to get and interact with. So, versus a snake where it just drinks out of its water bowl usually, and you feed it once a week. For me, it's that daily interaction with them and that relationship, and watching their hilarious behavior is what makes lizards just so much fun.
Yeah, no kidding. They just have to eat a lot. That's what I like about my boas, is I don't have to feed them very much.
Yep, and that's something people got to take into account, is that are they going to be able to spend that time with them, and they don't, like the tree monitors, they're okay eating twice a week. They don't have to eat a bunch, but they'll eat every day if you give them food every day, and so they definitely benefit from that. But then geckos and stuff, geckos don't have that kind of metabolism for the most part. So, I think that's why geckos are really popular, almost exploding in the hobby. Always have been a huge thing. So there's so many good options for people to find that animal that's going to fit what they're looking for. if they can just be patient enough. That's one thing. I'm glad I'm finally out of the endless acquisition phase with animals. I don't want anything else. I'm sure things will always come up here and there, but I just want to do more for the animals that I have, learn more, understand them more, and just share them, with people. And that's what it's all about for me. But when somebody comes in, they're in a rush to buy as much stuff as they can, as fast as they can. And so just trying to get them to think about that. And I think you continue that great fight of giving them a platform of base knowledge to do. I think your podcast is really hitting home with that.
Oh, good. Well, I'm happy to hear that. And yeah, I hit the exact same moment where I'm not out to acquire way more animals. And it's funny how that shift happened in my mind. Like I hit this cap, and now my interest is in just doing better with what I have, and showing people that it can be really fun to add more to the enclosures and give more the animal more opportunity for a better life.
Yep. Absolutely.
Well, Forrest, this has been fantastic. It's really great to hear someone in the hobby like yourself with a really good head on your shoulders and thinking about things in a different way. Not everybody thinks in the same way that you do, I think, but I think it's the right direction the hobby's headed. Can you let everybody know where they can find you? I know you have a few different things going online.
Yep. Yeah. Instagram, Zoo Dreams. I do a lot with the story thing on there. So if you want to follow what I'm doing, check that out. Also, my Facebook, Forrest Fanning. My reptile company is called Reptek. My rodent company is coldbloodedcafe.com. So you can find me there. And then I also work with Dragonwood Conservancy with crocodile conservation. So check us out on Facebook at the Dragonwood Conservancy. And thanks for having me on. I really appreciate the kind words and you giving me this chance to come on and chat with you, man.
Well, I really appreciate it. It was an absolute pleasure, and I'll make sure everything's in the show notes for everybody so they can find all those links there.
Awesome.
All right, that is the end of that episode. Thank you so much for listening to that. And Forrest, if you're listening to this piece of the podcast, thank you so much for joining me on the episode. I absolutely had a great time chatting with you. Now, for everybody else listening, I would really love for you to really think about what Forrest said in the episode and think of some great ways that you think that you could help the hobby and, maintain the health and the function of the hobby, because it is so important that we are able to maintain this. And like I said, the episode is called Leveling Up the Hobby because I think we're ready to do that. And I think, Forrest came up with some really great out-of-the-box ideas for how anybody and any individual can help level up the hobby. So do some brainstorming. Think about what you can do. If you have an idea, throw it in the comments. We'd love to see it. I'd love to see what people are coming up with. I know there's millions of ideas out there, so anything that you can do to help the hobby is fantastic, because we each need to take that individual responsibility for the hobby and learn how to leave the hobby in a better state than when we found it. If you did enjoy that episode, definitely consider giving it a 5-star rating on iTunes, or the podcast a 5-star rating on iTunes. I know I would absolutely appreciate it. You can give me a follow on Instagram at animalsathomeca. I do post down there once in a while. I try to do better with it, and so you can kind of keep in touch with me there. Send me a DM if you want to say hi. And I think that is it. I will leave you with that. I will talk to you guys in a couple of weeks.